As Gloria said, I will introduce myself. I'm a retired researcher in demography from Statistics Norway. I have worked a lot in other countries as well, and since I retired, particularly on CRVS and statelessness and refugee statistics have been my main themes. So I'll go straight on if the system works now. Let me see. Yeah, first, what is a population register? United Nations has a long definition from 1969, but the shorter one is that it is a system for recording and storing data on individuals. It could be the whole population or a part of a population. But if we intend to have a register of the total population of a country or region, we also need to establish a register. Running it is one thing, and there are three basic ways of establishing a population register. First, we can base it on the population census, which includes everybody in principle of a country. That's how we did it in Norway. Or we can start with a civil register of births, or we can start with a register of ID cards or ID numbers. All of these have advantages and disadvantages. But the thing is that this register needs to be regularly updated with births, deaths, immigrations and emigrations, and ideally also with internal moves. So if you have a register of births, for example, you need to update it with when people die, because otherwise it will just grow and grow. And ideally with when people emigrate from a country. If you have a good population register, it may yield statistics if it covers more or less the total population, such as, sorry, I have some problems seeing. I will try to, I cannot see the whole slides. Okay, let me see. Yeah, now or still. Okay, I'll try to remember. You can read population by age and sex at the end of each year, the statistics, or birth and death rates. Now, briefly about how population registration has developed in Norway. It started a long time ago when baptisms, marriages and burials were recorded in church registers by the priests. In 1735, the priests were asked to send annual summaries of events to bishops, who then forwarded them to the ministry. And this is actually a very early example of use of administrative data to make statistics. This went on from 1735 and has been going on for every year since now. So we have time series of almost 300 years of births and deaths. In 1964, that is when the modern population registration started. In the meantime, we had local population registers on paper. But in 1964, Statistics Norway actually established a population register based on the 1960 census. So everybody was enumerated in the 1960 census was included. And all those people who were enumerated then were assigned an ID number. A unique number, it's called a unique ID number or PIN or UI, and there are different acronyms for that. So the next censuses, the next four censuses used more and more administrative data. That is combining administrative data with the regular census enumeration. say marital status, address, names, were also drawn from the register and pre-printed actually on the enumeration forms. In 2001, there were dwelling numbers were introduced and linked to persons, so that every person in the country, or almost every, it wasn't 100% successful immediately, were linked to a dwelling number. And that means that enables household statistics, because then we know how many people live in one house dwelling, which is then defined as the same as a household. Moreover, in the 2001 census was the last traditional census in Norway, where there were enumerators, not enumerators, it was done by mail, but where data were collected from the population. So as I said, please ask questions if there's anything you'd like me to discuss further. And in 2011, Norway had the first census based on administrative data only. There were no enumerations, no field work. Everything was done from registers. I use the term register data and administrative data interchangeably, or just registers.
Okay, I will interrupt you with a question.
Yeah.
So when you say
yes,
that persons were enumerated and they were assigned a unique number, does that mean, was that an exercise that was done, like, did you enumerate people and tell them this is your number, or did they have to come back and get the number? Like, was it an internal activity of the statistics office?
It was an internal during when the census, 1960 census was taken, there were no plans to do this. But then actually many employers demanded a unique number for everybody, because it was too complicated very complicated to report people to the social security system and when people were employed. So they wanted unique numbers, so that they were introduced by Statistics Norway. And later, I'm not quite sure how people were informed. I think they sent letters to people by mail, ordinary snail mail, telling them their number. Or people could approach the local population register and ask for the number. I'm not exactly sure how that was done. But today, it's an 11-digit number, and everybody living in Norway, except for children, of course, they also have numbers. We know our numbers by heart. Okay. Just an example of how this is done today when there's a new birth. Say there's a birth in a hospital. Then a notification is sent to the Central Population Register, which then checks the information about the parents and returns an ID number to the hospital, whether it's used for to record the birth. Also, the population register sends the ID number by regular mail to the mother of the child. So, and this now it takes only a few seconds to assign a new number. If the mother lives in Norway and has a number already. So the Central Population Register is also the civil register. This system is not particular to Norway. It's the same, more or less the same system in all the Nordic countries. They're quite similar, not identical, but similar. And they were all introduced in the 1960s based on the census. And the characteristics of the Nordic system is that it includes all legal residents of the country, including children and foreign citizens. So there's no special register of foreigners. They are there, but the information about their citizenship is included in the register as a special variable. And as I said, children are assigned a number at birth, not at the age of maturity or at the age 16 or 18. And everybody has, as I said, a unique personal identification number, 11 digits. It includes date of birth and gender. Yes. And as I said, the Central Population Register is also the civil register, and it also serves as the Identity Management Administration. So it's the same institution. This started up in Statistics Norway, but was in the 1990s transferred to the Directors of Taxes because this was an administrative task to run a register and not a statistical task. So, the population register is regularly updated with events from civil registration and elsewhere. The register and the PIN are widely used for administrative purposes, statistics, and research. And an example of administrative purposes is, for example, for schools to know where the students come from and to admit new students. It's used for tax purposes, for passports, for voting. And statistics, almost all statistics in Norway now is based on the population register and other registers. I will also mention some examples of research later. Because the PIN enables linking and combining the CPR with data from other administrative registers, such as Social Security, taxes, passports, health, education, bank accounts, property, businesses. So information, say, on health and education are not included in the Central Population Register, but in other registers. So you could, we call the CPR a base register. The system works very well in the Nordic countries, and one reason for that is that there is very close cooperation between public institutions. It's not like institutions want to share data to improve the data. They know that no institutions can sit on their data and protect it without sharing. But we know that confidentiality is a important issue, and we have a special legislation and a special institution called the Data Inspectorate that safeguards this, looks after that the law is followed, and that if somebody wants to do research or do something special with variables and data on individuals, they have to apply for a permission. To show you the width of this, this shows, I will not go into everything, the institutions sending data to the population registry on a regular basis. Just to show you two examples. One is Director of Health, or that is hospitals, which sends data on birth and deaths to the registry. Another example is the Director to Immigration, which sends data on immigration and emigration, on nationality, etc. And there are many others here. There you see marriages, separations and divorces. But where is Statistics Norway? What kind of data do they transmit to the Central Population Registry? It's not there, because the statistical institutions is not supposed to disclose data on individuals to other institutions, data that can be used to identify individuals. They have to be anonymized if it's done. But on the other hand, the Central Population Register transmits data to other institutions. And there you see many other institutions. There you see Statistics Norway is one of the main recipients. Another one is Director of Elections, which receive data on all persons eligible to vote about 2 or 3 months before an election, because there are some people who are too young to vote, or who are foreign citizens. So everybody doesn't have the right to vote. And at the bottom you see it says about 2,000 entities. These include banks and hospitals and schools and universities and institutions that need to know, for example, where people live and their age, and perhaps also the name of the spouse and children. So it's widely distributed, but each institution gets only the data they need. So in Statistics Norway, the work is concentrated on using the population register. There's a special statistical population register, which is linked to all these other and many other registers, say on education, if you want to make statistics on the number of people who have completed a higher education, or there's crime, if you want to study at which age do people commit most crimes, or is there any national pattern? Are immigrants more or less criminal than the natives? Those are issues that can be studied by linking these different registers. Now, a register consists of 2 types of variables. There are flow variables and stock variables. The flow variables are variables of events that change often. Say the civil register events like births and deaths, but also marital changes, emigrations and immigrations to the country, internal moves within the country. The 2 last ones are not considered civil events, but they are still registered by the same institution. Address changes when a person moves, he or she has to report that. Name changes when many women change name when they marry, or people may also have other reasons for changing a name. Or citizenship, when many immigrants after 70 years, they can apply for Norwegian citizenship, or shorter period if they are married. The most important stock variable is are variables that change infrequently or are permanent. Say the PIN number usually do not change unless there's something wrong, say in the date of birth. The resident status is information about the status of a person, whether the person lives in the country, has emigrated, has died, no permanent address, or has disappeared. So as I will say later, nobody is deleted, but the status is changed. So the address is also, although the address may change, it's not a flow variable, it's a stock variable. Municipality is where people live. It's not. It may be part of the address or it may not. Dwelling number is now important to produce household statistics, and for tax reasons, for administrative reasons, it's also important. Or say, if a person calls the 113 because they are sick, and the ambulance goes to house. It's a big apartment building. They need to know which dwelling in a big apartment. It could be in Oslo. There are apartment buildings with 100 apartments, and then this is very helpful for people to know, for the ambulance people to know where to go to find the person who is sick. Place of birth, either municipality in Norway or country if abroad. Full name of the person, first name and family name, surname prior to marriage for women or for men, citizenship, country of immigration, where they came from, country of emigration, where they went, a marital status, and the last term here is extremely important. It gives the PIN, the number of the spouse of a person if married, mother and father. And this enables linking of siblings, cousins, children, grandparents, or family trees, which is extremely useful for studying, say, hereditary diseases from grandparents to children and grandchildren, for example. Any question? Not yet, okay. Now, since in most countries the civil registration agency is not part of the National Statistical Office. Philippines is one exemption from this, but most countries have separate institutions. But there need to be good cooperation between these institutions, and the statistical office should receive microdata from the civil registration agency, not aggregate data that is ready-made tables. Because of why is that? It's important for quality control and to enable the statistical office to produce the tables they want to, say, the right age groups, etc. And it's also used for detection of errors. I will briefly mention two examples from Norway, where the oldest woman in Norway was found to become very old, 110 years, 111, and 112, or 113, or 114. Then my colleagues were very curious about this. Is this really such an old woman living in Norway? So they went to the house, to the address she was registered on in Oslo, and they found there was no house there. Then they called a person with a similar family name who was her son, and they told him, oh, my mother, she went back to Spain 20 years ago and she died 10 years ago. But her emigration was not registered. The same is the case for many emigrations which are not registered because people are not so anxious to report emigration when they are leaving a country. They have other things to think about. But sometimes, say, Statistics Norway send out questionnaires in a sample survey and then some are returned, and then they can conclude that, this, or investigate further. They tell this population register that you should investigate these people. We think they've left the country. So this is done. There are some other issues regarding the use of administrative data. Here, as I said, nobody is deleted physically from the registered, but the status is changed. So of course, and this is useful for making historical statistics, and also when an emigrated person is re-immigrating to Norway, the person will, of course, not get a new ID number but keep the old one, but the status of that person will be changed. Population statistics is made by Statistics Norway from a statistical population register, which is identical to the CPR, except it includes a few additional variables, say variables for people that were not captured in the 1960 census. This statistical register is updated from the CPR every night, 5 times a week, with all new transactions. And as I said, it's identical, but it's designed to be more useful by statistics. And it includes some more historical variables. And as I said, dwelling numbers enable the production of household statistics. Some examples of statistics analysis. One is that we have register-based censuses, which I will not say so much about now, but there will be a webinar next week under the SCAP hat where I will talk about this more. The register is also used for drawing samples for surveys and often combining the sample survey with administrative data. And this enables drawing, stratifying or drawing a sample. Say we can draw a sample of immigrants only, or of people with no education only, or only women or only men. So sampling is not done in the field or on the map, but it's done in the register. And the administrative data that are used in the sample survey are like date of birth and marital status, household composition, educational background, say. The register makes it possible to make life histories of individuals, of births, and of marriages and divorces and migrations. And this can be used to make distribution of women by number of children, so they can see how many women in the country have no children at all, or 1 child or 2 children. The same can be done for men, actually. We can see how long immigrants have lived in Norway and to see how their labor force participation develops with the length of stay. And we can see how many who re-immigrate to Norway. We can calculate estimate life expectancy by occupation and total fertility rate by education. Do women with high education have more children than other women, or fewer children, for example? And finally here, the COVID-19 mortality can be studied. There's by socioeconomic, demographic and household determinants. There's a project in Sweden, Statistics Sweden, which does this now, or is it the University of Stockholm? Sorry. For example, do people with more education have lower or higher mortality? Do people living in big households have more higher COVID-19 mortality than people living in by themselves? So at the end, this is the last slide. How do you start? If you are thinking this is interesting, your country should go ahead and start doing this, what do you think about? Well, first you need to establish a register from a census, civil register of births, or a national ID register. Secondly, you need to have a good civil registration system, because it's the CR system that provides data on births and deaths, which are the most important. Unique ID numbers are, as I said, almost necessary, because in principle you could manage using name and date of birth, but it becomes very complicated. And in many countries there are many people with the same name. There are even people with the same name born on the same date. So it's not recommended. Unique numbers is the best. The register has to be updated regularly. It doesn't have to be updated every day, but regularly with births and migrations. And it takes patience, hard work, and a long-term perspective to obtain a high-quality register. But you don't have to wait for 50 years before you can benefit from it. The benefits can be reaped almost right away because you can start producing statistics and have quality control. So thank you. Those were my slides. I'm happy to receive questions and comments.
Thank you.
Gloria?
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Helge. Thank you for your presentation. And I hope that our participants have been able to pull up some interesting information from that. I want to welcome questions and answers from colleagues, but one question from my side is, I'd like to understand what level of, so I understood that there are two components here. There is the civil register of births, primarily births and deaths, and then you also have immigration and immigration records. So what level of completeness is required? Do you have to have 100% for your births and deaths for you to be able to start working on a population register? Or if a country has a register that is lesser than that, but maybe 80%, do you think that that is a feasible project to start thinking about?
Oh, definitely. If it's only 10%, as in some African countries, then it may be too early to start. But if you say like 80, 70, 60, 70, 80%, definitely there's a good reason to start. And then to use this as an element in improving civil registration also.
Right.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions from countries, from partners? Right. Yes, there's a question. Helena, please take the floor.
Hello, good evening. I'm Elena Cruz from ECLAC. I'm wondering what would be the priority to start. Like many countries in their regions, they don't have a complete address list. So how countries can improve that with, for example, having updated information on georeference locations and seeing how it changes in time, and how can we identify and locate the person in this mappings. And so the connection between the physical space, the geography, and the population allocation. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very important question. And establishing an address system is a big task in itself and very important, but it's not absolutely necessary for the population register. At the beginning, you could use name of village or perhaps name of island or town or city as the address and or a place of residence. But then as the as the address system is developed, you can introduce more specific addresses. Say street addresses and dwelling numbers is the best, but that is a fairly big project in itself. So, but you can start without having an address system, I think.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Helena. Do we have any other questions? I think, Helge, I would also be interested in understanding the ITs on the IT side of things, because I know for quite a few Pacific countries, the platforms that we are using for civil registration are MS Access, MS Excel, and there are some few countries that have customized IT platforms for civil registration. So I just wanted to get your views about what do you think about the IT component of this piece of work? What is the necessary?
Well, I think a good IT system is necessary but not sufficient. I worked in countries where private companies has tried to digitize the system, but it's really the practice and the rules and regulations are the most important. You can use any system, I think, DBase or Oracle or SAS. A spreadsheet is not good for the population registries, but it has to be a database system, I think. But for making statistics, of course, spreadsheets can be made. But there are many, there's not one system that can be used, there are many different systems. So it depends on what the people are comfortable with.
Any other questions, colleagues? Yeah. Yes. Helena, did you have another question?
No, sorry if I left the hand up. Okay.
No problem. So I think if we don't have, yes, we have a question from Ian. Ian, please feel free to start. I think you're muted. Ian, I think you need to unmute yourself.
Well, yeah, I can see his questions written. He said, Helge, it took many years to, let's see, now it disappeared. But basically, he said it took many years to establish a system in Norway. How many years would it take now? Much shorter, I think. It's difficult to say exactly how many, but with the advantage of what we have learned from the country starting this, and with the new technology, I think it can be done in a few years to establish a register. It will take longer to conduct the census based on administrative data only. But as I said, to establish a system a couple of years, but then quality control needs to go on for several years after that. A gradual improvement of the quality and coverage of the population, or as you say, completeness.
Right. And how much do you think it will cost? What is the most expensive part of this project? Is it the...
Well, at the beginning, it was having local registers because we had registers we had more than 400 local registers that register the information about births and deaths and migrations, etc. Now it's we only have a central register, and so much has been computerized about the births and deaths, etc., that the manpower needs are less. So I guess what the most important costs are now, I'm not sure. It's very highly skilled manpower. But I could say, I just checked that the cost of the 2001 census in Norway was about a little more than €3 per person, which was partly traditional. The cost of the 2011 census was a tenth of that, €0.3 per person. So it reduced the cost considerably. So it's of course much less expensive to make statistics from administrative data. So the costs are quality control, I think, most important.
Any more questions from participants? I think if we don't have more questions, Helge, it would mean that we have really appreciated hearing from you, and we have learned a lot of new things, and we really want to appreciate you staying up late in the night to join us for this webinar. We will still have opportunities to collect questions from countries, and we can share those with you if there are any. But for now, I really would like to take the opportunity to really appreciate your time to join us today.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to receive questions later. But now, actually, I think I'm going to bed, if you don't mind.
All right, all right.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye. Have a good night. So, colleagues, thank you for listening through that presentation. And we will have one more presentation which basically builds up from the presentation by Helge. And I know quite a number of times he mentioned the civil registration system and how it is important for establishment of functional population registers. And so my presentation today will basically be zooming into that point, and I'll provide you with a brief background of civil registration systems and their functions, and then I'll talk to an overview of where we are in the Pacific in terms of CR systems, and then I'll conclude with two key strategies that I think we should consider if we are thinking of improving our registration systems. So, of course, we have been talking quite a number of times about the importance of civil registration from a human rights angle. Okay, sorry about that. So we've been talking quite a number of times about the importance of civil registration systems from a human rights angle, particularly in what we call conferring a legal identity to each and every member of the population. And that is really the first human rights that an individual is entitled to upon existence, and it is really the basis for all the other human rights. Legal identity is basically established at the point of birth registration, and it is through birth registration, and of course within the broader framework of the CRVS systems. So people who are not registered, they will be excluded and not recognized by governments in a formal way. And so when we talk about development and the SDG goals, then it means that they will continue to be marginalized and remain poor. So in terms of civil registration systems again and population registers, we see that at least 10 SDGs benefit from civil registration data and the data coming from population registers, or they will be accelerated through the realization of legal identity by members of a population. Now, this graph, we have also discussed about it a few times. This is what is called the UN holistic approach to legal identity, and it is also the basic operational framework or organizational framework of a civil registration, vital statistics, and identity management system. So ideally, it is recommended that countries approach this kind of arrangement in terms of organizing their CRVS systems. On the left-hand side, what we have is important events, which they call vital events, and these flow through different organizations. For example, births and deaths are organized by the health institutions. Marriages and divorces will be happening within courts and judicial institutions, but all that information needs to flow into the civil registration database. From there, it should flow into the vital statistics database, and the other aspect, the other platform that it should flow into is a population register. Now, the population register is recommended as the ideal platform through which those legal identities are distributed to other important databases or other important functional registers which manage person data. So basically, this is the entire picture of how the system should look like. Of course, the aspect of interoperability and the ability to share data between institutions is very key, with civil registration being a key foundation for that data sharing process. So what we see in many countries is an issue of multiple identities, where different institutions of government are involved in registration of persons. For instance, people can be registered for social security programs, another database can exist of children, another database of probably people with disabilities, and so on and so forth. So there's a likelihood of countries coming up with multiple identities without the ability to determine which one is the one true source of identity. So this holistic framework primarily is around centralizing and centralizing the identity function and enabling really governments to come up with the one true platform that can support that can streamline this work in countries. So ideally, to avoid fragmentation, it is recommended that countries look into system integration, interoperability, cooperation between stakeholders, and really have a vision before establishing these siloed approaches, before establishing this silo kind of functional registers. So I just was reading through a report that says that in 2006, Nigeria had 12 ongoing ID card projects, and 8 of those had biometrics. And you can imagine the cost implication of these kind of projects. And it's all in the vision of trying to find a reliable source of information for governments where they know that this is the one trusted source or identity of individuals within a particular country. So streamlining this kind of information sources is very important, and the recognition of civil registration as the foundation for legal identity is critical in that process. So again, this is just to belabor the point that we need one legal identity and not more than one to avoid that kind of multiple identity projects, and having the civil register with providing information on vital events, and that flows into the population register and the other functional registers. Why we emphasize on the civil register is that the civil register captures information on births and deaths, meaning that when a new identity is created, they are the first legal institution that have that information, and when someone dies, they have that information, and so they are the civil register is the primary register that can ensure that everyone else is updated on deaths. Otherwise, you can create your identities through a national ID register, but because there is no process of updating that register with, say, information about deaths, then it's likely to end up with a register that has a stock of dead people. Then Helge spoke to, so this is just to belabor Helge's point, where he says that civil registration is the ideal foundation for establishment of the population register, and also to provide information that will flow into the national ID system. However, we see that in some countries, national ID programs appear to be implemented before a robust civil registration system is in place. And in this kind of scenarios, it can still be used as a starting point to complete the civil register. However, it's important that that platform is scalable and that it is interlinked with the civil registration system once the civil registration system is in good shape. So basically, a complete civil registration system will always be needed, whether a country begins with a national ID system or with any other functional database. When we look at civil registration in the Pacific, different countries are at different levels. We really have countries that have hit that 100% over a 90% mark, quite a few actually as compared to other regions. We see that while we also have countries, of course, in the lower range. Birth registration does better than death registration in most countries, though there are countries we see like Fiji where death registration appears to be more complete as compared to birth registration. In terms of national ID systems, we also have countries that have moved towards establishing this, like Vanuatu, Palau, Papua New Guinea, Tonga, and Kiribati. And the key issue, I think, here remains, are these systems interoperable? Are they linked to the civil registration database to ensure that updating is continuous and that old identities or people who are dead are no longer existing as alive within those registries? And then we also have some countries like Samoa and Fiji who are now in the process of establishing these registration systems. So in the context of the broader discussion on population registers, as Helge pointed out, it will be of great interest to ensure that these systems are hitting their 100% mark if we are thinking about moving towards population registers. So in the Pacific, we see quite a number of challenges related to why CRVS systems are not performing properly. And I'll just outline 5 key challenges that we see in the region. And one of them is accessibility to services and the costs related to access of civil registration service, especially in countries where there is more than one island. This becomes a key issue. Most countries are also charging fees for registration or for certificates, and for members of the public who might be having to choose between a meal and a certificate, that can be a very difficult decision to make. The other thing we see is that the registration processes sometimes can be complex, they can be cumbersome, and in most countries we see that a large burden of registration is placed on members of the public as compared to the government. So what I mean here is sometimes you would see that an individual might need to come to the civil registration office like so many times to be able to bring the documents that are needed, or the process requires them to move from one building to another, from one place. So basically what we see is that the process is not convenient, and it's very much reliant on the public to facilitate it. And then at the same time, we have members of the public who have not reached the level of appreciating the importance of civil registration, and so this becomes a challenge when it's combined with the fact that we rely on them to bring that information across to governments. And then there are other issues like legal frameworks that do not support registration, IT platforms that are not functional, and basically with registration systems that are not of good quality, then what happens over time is that the government does not have trust in the system, and statistics from those platforms are found not to be reliable. So these are some of the challenges that quite a number of countries are grappling with. And I would like to then speak to 2 key strategies which I think that countries in the lower range of this discussion would be thinking into. One of the things that we have seen, not just for countries in this region, but other countries elsewhere, is the importance of linking civil registration with other social services, and in particular health. When we think about births and deaths, most of them happen in health institutions, and if registration services are provided around that place and not requiring the public to then come to a different place, then there is a chance for improvement. Here I've put a graphic of Vanuatu. Between year 2013 and 2014, Vanuatu was able to rise from a 22.4% birth registration for children below 1 to almost 52%. And this was mainly associated with the provision of registration services through schools and through hospitals, that is linking up registration services with other non-mainstream, other places where the population would engage in on an ideal basis. Of course, there's a bit of a stall from there, but it does give us an idea of what can happen when we try to link up registration services with other important government services. What you also see, and which I've not put here in the presentation, is that very many countries have very good immunization, BCG immunization coverage rates. Most countries in the Pacific are actually hitting over 80% in terms of BCG immunization coverage. And that then is another opportunity to say that there is a chance that these kids are interacting with the government, and really we should be able to make use of those opportunities we should be able to make use of those opportunities to improve our registration coverage rates. Some of the ways that we can partner with health institutions is, for instance, just placing a service registration desk in the hospital, and we've seen this in places like Kiribati, where they have recently introduced, they sent one of their civil registration staff to actually function from the hospital, and I think this is one of the very encouraging ways that improvements can happen. The second point which I spoke to is about the organization, or is about the complexity of the registration processes. And I'll show you this graph. So in quite a number of countries, and in particular countries where registration rates are on the lower level, and I'm not just talking about the Pacific, but globally, this appears to be a very common registration process where an event happens in the hospital and the event is created within the hospital. That is, the Ministry of Health captures the record. The event is then, but the member of the public has to collect the record from the hospital and go to the office of the civil registrar, and sometimes they have to come for quite a number of trips before that registration process is completed. Now, this is a very burdensome process. Now, we look at another process where a scenario 2 where an event is recorded within the Ministry of Health, and the Ministry of Health transfers that information to the civil registration office, but still the parent has to go to the civil registration office for that registration to happen. The thing is that the Ministry of Health is a government institution and the civil registration office is a government institution. There is certainly an element of wanting to verify records, but I believe there is an opportunity to leverage on those two institutions, being that they are already government institutions, to ensure that the process is not so much heavy on the public, that if the parent doesn't come or if the informant doesn't come, then that information is not continued to be registered. So the last scenario here, and which would be an emerging best practice, is where the Ministry of Health captures the event and directly that event is shared to the civil registration department, and the parent at one point would come to collect the certificate. But however, at this stage, that information has been entered in the registrar and it has already been verified as being true. So this is one of the approaches where we can really reduce the burden of registration and shift it from members of the public to a government institution, to the government institutions, and also recognizing that civil registration is actually a primary function of the government to its people, and a responsibility of a government to its people. So we usually recommend basic few steps to countries, and one of those is about ensuring that there is a functional committee that can support coordination for improvement of CRVS systems. We also recommend that countries do assessments of their CRVS systems, that is from the input perspective, the processes perspective, and the output perspective, and then those assessments are important in helping derive a national action plan, and then countries can work towards improvement of the plan. So SPC and what we call the Brisbane Accord Group, which is a group of partners that work in the civil registration field, we do support countries in this sort of work, and we are very we really invite invitations from countries to work on that, to work with us in supporting the undertaking of CRVS system assessments and development of action plans. So we believe with this kind of work, then you will be able to identify where your key issues are, and then you can target your resources to the right implementation area. So just to summarize the key messages, this is my last slide, is that we need complete and high quality civil registration systems to grant legal rights and also to support the realization of the SDG agenda. And within the broader context of this webinar series, we will need well-functioning civil registration systems if we are thinking about population registers. We've seen that while some countries have made progress, there's still a lot of effort that needs to be made to achieve complete systems, and key strategies which we might start thinking about are how we can link civil registration services with other crucial services such as health, and trying to review our registration processes so that the burden is not so heavy on members of the public. And then with my last slide, I talked about the importance of conducting comprehensive assessments, which are important in helping you identify where the problem is, and developing national action plans, which provide you with a systematic way of improvement. That should be my last slide. I have put some references and I will try to update them so that you have good access to key references. Here we have a website where we try to put in key resources that you might need in your CRVS journey, and in the presentations that we will put in the website, we will ensure that those key documents that you could benefit from are well listed within the last part of this presentation. So I think that's it from my side. I will again welcome any questions, any comments, and anyone who would like to contribute to the discussion. Do we have any thoughts from the floor? All right. It appears like today we don't have a lot of questions. So I think I'll just do a quick summary of the session to say the point of today's discussion was to basically delve into population registers and what they are. And I also just want to underline that as a part of this project, countries that are interested in implementing population, we would be interested in knowing which countries are keen on implementing population registers so that we can begin organizing that kind of support for you. And we are happy to start having these discussions with you of how that journey can begin. I think with that, that's what we had prepared for you today. We were not able to be joined by Indonesia, but we will be able to see how the information that they wanted to share can be shared with you. And then we are planning for our next roundtable session where we will have a few country presentations sharing their experiences about the use of registers and administrative data and ID platforms in our next roundtable session. So that information will be shared with you on email. But for today, I think I just want to really thank you again for joining us, and I hope you found the session interesting and informative. And I think until next time, thank you.